Chapter 3. Problem Surmounting. He stood over the sink in front of the mirror, scrubbing his hands using the bathroom cloth because he had no brushes or anything that could effectively scrub out the green mess more easily. He's in my house, in my lounge, bleeding like a stuck pig. Jesus. He fell down some stairs. What a liar. He doesn't even pretend to make a better story. His pride is killing him. I saw him naked, too. Due to the whole blood episode, I kind of forgot to see what he had downstairs. Stupid of me. For years I've been wanting to know, and I had the perfect chance, and I forgot. A small part of him was glad he had not looked, had not known. That way his view of Zim would forever remain dignified. Dib turned on the faucet and watched old green blood swish down in a flash of hot water. He wanted to be rid of it. Not because it disgusted him, but because it left a bitter aftertaste of mortality in his mouth. Death was always there, that revolting second layer beneath all of life. He never really suspected that he could lose Zim just as fast as any other. The wire trap many years ago had taught him that much. With the squeak of the tap, he turned the faucet off, dried his hands, and went into the bedroom. Then he closed the door and locked it from the inside by running home a single bolt. Admittedly, he was nervous. He knew Zim now, and knew he was no longer the threat he used to be, but instinctively he was anxious. Since that day he had stolen Zim's PE shirt and then setting that disastrous wire trap not long after when he was still a kid, he had come to fear the Irkins pack more than he feared the alien who carried it. He dressed down to his boxers and slipped in under the cold bed covers, craving a cigarette even though he never smoked in the bedroom. He opened his nightstand drawer and fished around past the box of cigarettes for his gun. It was a Walter P9, a useful handgun that he had bought when he had turned of age. He never once used it, and he dreaded the day when it was demanded of him to pull the trigger. He was pretty sure Irkins were vulnerable to bullets as they were to wires. As terrible as it would be for Zim to purposefully break in and effectively menace Dib to use it, he very much doubted the alien would even leave the couch. That wound was grievous, and had still been dripping through the gauze as if Zim was leaking rapturous water. But Dib always took the initiative and rarely left little to chance. He thought about slipping the gun under his pillow and then decided to sit propped up in bed with it in his hands. The safety remained on, but even so, just holding it made him uncomfortable. Shame I didn't think about installing any CCTV in my lounge or anywhere downstairs. I guess I'm not that prepared after all. I won't know what he's up to until the morning. With his little lamp left on, he faced the locked door, staring at it, or occasionally at the window across from him as the moon drifted through the silvery dark sky. What if he needs me? What if he's gonna die? No, I already know he's old. This accident of his doesn't make a damn difference. It just makes it quicker, easier for both of us. Dib remained posted on his bed, cold fingers clutching the gun. Time moved on, indifferent to his vigil. He must have slept because he woke up only to find the gun still in his hands and the sunlight streaming in through the window. The birds were warbling out their tunes as cars rushed down the road in the foreground. Dib looked to the door. It was still closed. Still locked. He opened it, curiously afraid of what he'd find down below. Quickly, Dib changed into his spare clothes and creaked down the stairs, the gun stashed in the waistband of his pants. "Zim," he called quietly, "don't jump around any corners." He was surprised to hear a faint reply coming from the lounge. Zim had remained on the couch. This time he was sitting up and leaning slightly, his antenna arched forwards as if to hear him better. Blankets were huddled around him as he tried to cover up the naked parts of himself. "Dib Stink, don't go back on your promise. If you so much as—" "I'm not. Honest." He noticed the fresh bloody stains on the sofa and frowned at the sight, but didn't comment. Zim looked pretty angry, his patience as brittle as ice. He doubted his alien had slept a wink, if he even did need sleep. "Well, here you are." Dib parked up along the sidewalk and applied the handbrake. Directly beside them was the little Irkins' house. It stood with its usual solemn air with the ghastly lawn gnome staring off into space as they boarded the pristine garden path. Zim, sitting on the front passenger seat on a cushion to boost his height, looked shyly out the side window at his base. He was so small that his feet dangled off the lip of the seat, and he couldn't even look over the dashboard to view the world from the windshield. The entire experience with the Dib had been a long, unwelcoming affair. Dib seemed to take it all in his stride, which Zim found to be downright unnerving. Since when did the sole defender of Earth treat him with such civility? Surely there was something amiss, something he had overlooked. He judged this to be in the Dib's favor somehow, and that the human would later use whatever information he had gleaned against him. They had known each other now for just a little over 20 years, and much had changed between them. Something along the way of growing up, Dib had eventually lost interest in Zim, and instead had gone after jobs, girlfriends, and was then busy house hunting. As Zim fell down the agenda list, he began to realize why. He had stopped trying to take over the Earth. He himself hadn't even realized this. Not until that day when he had faced the computer and asked for a mission report. It had told him in its banal tone that he had not reported to the tallest in 5 years and had not made a significant advance in his personal mission for a decade. Even his status report read suspended, as if the computer had somehow moderated his actions from afar and sent these little notifications to his leaders. It had made him draw away from the console in horror, and he struggled to remember what he'd been doing that had been so important for the last decade of his life on Earth. "Aren't you getting out, Zim?" Dib turned to him, one hand resting on the leather grip of the steering wheel. A glint of mellow sunlight caught the left lens of his prescription glasses. Zim, feeling uncomfortable under his scrutiny, gripped the door handle and pulled it outwards. The car door clicked and opened. Releasing the seatbelt from his shoulder, he gingerly stepped out onto the gravel of the asphalt road. His injured side was stiff and feverish, but he was able to move around. He was back in his old uniform. It smelt strongly of human chemical agents they used to wash things with, but he was pleased it was at least blood-free. All that remained was a raggedy hole in his side where he'd been wounded. Now there was only gauze showing through that gap in his uniform, and Dib had done well to get all the stains out. "Zim?" "Fudgekin," Dib called when he still hesitated by the car. "Are you sure you're okay?" "I am perfectly fine, Earthsmeat," he rebuked with a harrowing growl. Even though Dib was a full-grown man, Zim often demoted him through insults he used to call him when he'd been but a boy. Old habits die hard, even for an Urkin. "But just because you sheltered me for one night does not make us friends. And thanks to you, my uniform now smells of lilac and rosebuds. It's disgusting!" And with that, he slammed the car door shut and marched around the front of the car to his garden path. Dib shook his head and released the handbrake. "Aliens," he muttered. Then he was driving off. Back home. Zim stood at the door, watching him leave. He knew he should really hurry and get inside. He was, after all, without his useful disguise, and anybody would see his antenna and fuchsia eyes. But he didn't move until Dib's car had disappeared over the brow of the hill. Only then did he confront the door in his path. He could hear the main TV blazing out cartoons even through the door. It made him hesitate as cool winds seemed to blow through him. Quickly checking his rear to make sure no humans were up to spy on him at this early hour, he gathered his failing courage and tapped on the door. He could not be afraid. Would not be afraid. This was his base, his mission. He would not hide from his robot. What happened had been a nasty accident. A bit of reprogramming and Gur would be good as new. What exactly had happened, Zim was not sure, but he could fix it. As the new sunshine pressed down on his pack, he heard the door unlock from within. He tried to prepare himself for what he'd see, and felt his nerves tighten up all the more. The door creaked open and Zim actually stepped back, one hand over his tummy as he anticipated another assault. Gur threw himself at him before he could prepare any kind of defense, and he felt a desperate panic yell bubbling up from within. But then Gur was hugging him, his cyan eyes wide with glee. "Oh, Master! Master, I love you! I missed you so bad!" "All right, enough! Let me get inside my own house, Gur, before someone sees." The robot barely gave him room to move, so he more or less struggled up the porch steps and into the lounge, shutting the door behind him from the aid of one of his elongated spider appendages. Now back in his own private chambers, he wanted to relax, but the tight cords within him refused to loosen. Gur was nuzzling him like a child nuzzling a father who had returned from a long absence. Zim didn't know what to do or say. It was hard to believe that just last night Gur had stabbed him so viciously. Maybe Gur simply hadn't realized what he was doing and hadn't understood the consequences. After all, Gur's brain was very limited, for his thinking process was very different to that of a sentient being. Maybe now Gur understood and would not be doing it again. Zim patted him weakly on the top of his metal head. "I missed you too, Gur. Just be a little more careful next time when you play. Urkins are notorious bleeders. Say, how about I make you some waffles?" "Waffles!" And Gur hugged him more tightly before then letting go to dance merrily about the room like some excited toddler. Zim watched him, a little relieved. He'd been expecting Gur's eyes to flash red, but there was nothing at all to suggest that anything was wayward about the robot. And here he'd been, worrying for nothing. Gur was like his old self. Except, there was something different. Zim approached him, inbuilt fear keeping him 4 steps from Gur all the time unless the robot crossed the boundary himself. "Where on Urk is the rest of your hand?" Gur stopped dancing and looked down at his left hand as if he himself had only just realized that part of him was missing. Sure enough, his little thumb was gone. The rest of his hand was fine. Almost guiltily, Gur peered upward at his master and did a little shrug. "I don't know." Zim rolled his eyes. Each time, however, Gur went to approach him, he backpedaled to maintain a respectable gap between them. "I don't have spare Sir Unit appendages on standby, you know." "Ah, well, it's the least of my problems anyway." He strolled into the kitchen, hands behind his back as he began to unwind. The TV blared away, showing some cartoons about kittens with superpowers. "Was you at a party?" Gur asked. After his giddy little spell of dancing like a maniac, he returned to his master's side as Zim turned to the cooker. He grabbed a pan and poured waffle mixture onto its surface. "No, Gur, I was at that Dib's place. Usually I'd yell at you for allowing that pig monkey anywhere near my home, but well, I suppose you did sort of save my life. Just don't do that again. I can't trust him. For all I know, he's stolen something or implanted some spy camera into my base." "Ooh, you're sad," the robot exclaimed readily. "No, Gur, I'm just glad you're okay." He turned up the heat on the stove and the pancake mixture started to sizzle. "You're making pancakes," Gur pointed out. Zim grumbled. He had trouble telling the difference between waffles and pancakes. "Oh well, just eat it. I have work to do." "Aw," the robot whinnied. "But you always work. You should dance, like McDuck." Zim muttered some incomprehensible response in Urkin. He added butter to the mixture, something he did very carefully lest it splash and cause him any skin burns. Then he flipped it over once with the spatula and turned down the heat. He wasn't quite sure why he was doing this. Really, it should have been the other way around, with Gur catering to his needs as a way of an apology. Zim wasn't sure how it got turned around. He supposed that doing things helped keep his mind diverted from his little injury problem. He neatly removed the pancake from the frying pan and coasted it onto an awaiting plate, where he then drizzled it with maple syrup and sugar, both of which he enjoyed himself. Then, he passed it on to Gur, who had a big grin on his metallic face. There. Now leave me in peace for an hour, and keep the TV volume down this time. I can't afford to have the neighbors complaining of the noise you make. Lemons! Gur guffawed as he literally drank down the pancake. Maple syrup splashed all up the robot's face. Zim grimaced in disgust. He did not stay. He made it to the toilet and sunk down into its diabolical depths. The little elevator took him down deeper and deeper until comfortable warmth from the temperature below filled him with sleepy serenity. This was his place, his domain. Nothing else on Earth, or perhaps even in the known universe, made him feel safer. Here, he was cocooned by his own aegis of technology. It was his nest, his hive. Out there among humans, even among the stars, he did not feel as safe, or as welcomed as he did here. He stepped out of the elevator on one of his lowest floors and started marching over to the main computer console. He soon came across a dark, dry puddle of green blood. It made him pause dramatically, one clawed hand rushing to his lips. This was where Dib must have come down to expect him, and then had hauled him back to the surface. "Computer!" he yelled. "Yes," the computer replied. Its voice boomed through the warm tunnel from seemingly everywhere at once. "Play back the last 11 hours. Did that human weasel filch anything from my database or the base itself?" A large pink monitor wormed its way out of a wall of tubing, and the screen showed him surveillance footage from precisely 11 hours ago. On the bottom right was the allotted time and day. The camera had a perfect view of the tunnel leading down from the main entrance, and on the floor, sodden with blood, was Zim himself many hours before. The Erkin tried to view his own self with cold indifference. He knew what had happened to him, and he didn't really care for a reminder. In the footage, Gur was kneeling by his side, trying to rouse him by shaking his body and pleading with him. The blood was clearly all over his little metallic hands, but he wasn't making the connection, or so it seemed. To think Gur had any malicious intent was a joke. Gur was clearly worried and confused, like a simpleton waking from his dream to find his parents gone. Zim shook his head at the footage, clearly at a loss. Then, he could hear the background elevator whirring away, and as the clock ticked down on the recording, Dib presently arrived on the scene carrying his backpack. He was wearing his customary trench coat, and he was warily eyeing up the base with fear and trepidation. No doubt Gur had called him somehow, probably through the phone line. He had done it before on occasion. He watched Dib approach his comatose self, and shadow Gur's posture by kneeling down beside him. "Zim?" he was whispering in the recording. There was no sign of him having any more interest in the place than necessary, which Zim found strange. He was in an alien base, grossly unsupervised. He could steal what he wanted, take what he pleased, vandalize the place, take pictures with his infuriating camera. So why wasn't he? Was it the promise that he had made that was holding true? He growled in irritation at his own left-sided deafness. "Computer, turn the volume up." "Yes, master." "Zim," the recording on Dib continued. Then he watched the human eye up the blood and dip his fingers down into the rapidly cooling pool of green goo. "Yes, it's blood, Dib. Get on with it." Jesus, what the hell happened?" "He won't get up," Gur was lamenting. "I think he ate too many walnuts. Can you maybe stitch him back up again before he loses any more sauce?" There was some static zipping across the screen and Zim ignored it. Now would be the perfect time for Dib to sneak in a picture or two or take some souvenir. But he surprised Zim yet again when the human did no such thing. He wrapped up the unconscious Erkin in his trench coat and promptly asked the computer for a quick route back up top. He watched Dib retreat, himself in the human's arms. Then, the footage faded to black. "End of recording," droned the computer. Zim ran a careful hand down his crooked antenna, causing him to flinch. He grumbled again. Touching it even gently hurt. Why did Dib do that? He could have left him to die, just like before in the wire trap. They got on as well as enemies could, but surely the bottom line of their relationship hadn't changed. Surely they were still at war. There must be some mistake. There had been something in Dib's eyes last night while he had lain impotent on the couch. What was it? Pity? Sadness? Shame? Dib knew something. He'd been acting so strange as of late, for months, almost as if he was sad. Like Dib was with a friend who had cancer, and it had nothing to do with his hearing impairment. He could not put his finger on it. Human emotions were beyond him, and more complicated than he could handle. He was still trying to learn their behavior and conduct after all this time, and even then, sometimes what they did went against all he had learned. Shit. He went to kick at a loose bit of tubing embedded in the wall, and when his boot connected with the middle cylinder, he felt something split in his side. Ouch! He hobbled backwards, slapping both hands to his bandaged sides. "Damn this pack!" he cringed, coughing. When he coughed, he winced from the fresh pain it caused in his spooch. "Why hasn't it healed me yet? This sort of injury should take but a day to heal completely." "Oh, Urk." He limped over to the console and started running his claws over its translucent keys. Computer, run an efficiency test on my pack. What is its functioning capacity?" A portable apparatus descended from the ceiling, and a beam of light erupted from its movable dome-like head. The beam was pinpointed into a concentrated red line from a slit in the dome, and then the line expanded until it became a curtain of pink light. This light descended over Zim's pack like a soundless waterfall as it scanned the exterior and interior of the artificial organ. The process only took a mere moment. Soon the portable dome had packed itself away and the computer was digesting the data. Presently, Zim stood waiting with about as much patience as he could manage. Finally, the computer replied with a visual display of numbers running down its giant screen. A lot of numbers were accompanied by Irkin symbols. Zim tried to read through these analytically, setting his feelings aside. Sometimes he was awfully glad he had been trained like he had, or he may have broken down right then and there. He scrolled down the results, his claws tapping on the keys occasionally like he was slowly playing the piano. Ironically, he was expecting these concise results. They matched what he'd already suspected. One thing after another. I strongly advise contacting the tallest, the computer advised in his in-tone indifference. Yes. He even laughed as if he'd found the whole thing to be quite amusing. He couldn't remember the last time he had laughed or even smiled. In fact, his facial muscles even ached when he tried to smile. But then, Irkins had not been built to smile, laugh, or play. Only the tallest had that luxury. He decided to take matters into his own hands like he often did, with consequence. Turning to the console, he mentally disconnected himself carefully from his pack, a foolish thing to do when he was still healing from a grave injury. The pack neatly landed on the console before him, and straight away he opened it up using a dismantling tool. The protective outer shell fell away, revealing the precious gizmos and circuits inside that were delicate once open for inspection. These high-tech instruments that served as a brain that kept his organs running at optimum efficiency were now out of date. Every warrior Irkin, or even a simple engineer, knew that their time would come one day, and usually a war-bred Irkin hoped to meet his end in a great battle where he could make his race proud. But sometimes an Irkin lived far longer than expected through the high stresses of military life, and soon came the day where they were evaluated to have their packs not only replaced, but upgraded so that they could serve their military term for another 100 or so years. Deemed unfit, however, and their packs would be cast aside, leaving the Irkin to die miserably before a crowd of onlookers. This is every unlucky Irkin's fate, should he live long enough to fail. Extra nervous whenever he detached himself from his life support because he was one step away from death, Zim looked through the wiring, finding that some of it was starting to fray. All of this could not be replaced by any rogue Irkin. The tallest were wise to pick and choose the elites they wanted to keep for future missions, and the riffraff were unable to modify their own packs. Sometimes Irkins did try, only to later fail and end up dying from botched attempts. None had ever succeeded. He himself could ask for an upgrade. He needed new parts to expand his life majorly, but only Irkins with promotions were allowed certain upgrades to ensure that their encoded memory and DNA survived another generation, for the Empire was very selective, and if nothing changed, Zim was sentenced to die a natural death. That was how the tallest lived for so long, their body chemistry never aging. Because they were Irkin leaders, they were basically immortal. Their packs were automatically upgraded every 10 years. He tried to clean out some dust that had settled around the little cables and buttons, being careful not to nudge anything out of place, but there was little else that he could do. Recovering the shell back onto his pack and sealing it closed, he stood patiently while it redelivered itself back into the slots inside his spine. The connection was briefly uncomfortable as an electrical discharge burned down his system. Once it had passed, he straightened, breathing deeply only then to splutter with coughs. Yes, a call to the tallest would be practical. If he asked for a new pack now, however, he would need to leave Earth to be evaluated, and he was nervous because of what nearly happened the last time. Computer, what is Gur up to? Another monitor squeezed through a miasma tubing to present itself, and on the flat screen was a live feed of Gur bouncing and flailing on the couch. On the TV was a Pokemon commercial. Nothing untoward there. Nothing at all. Gur was being his usual stupid self. Zim sighed and pushed the monitor away. In response, the screen folded up and disappeared back into the confines of the wall. Quickly, he brushed down his uniform to disperse it of wrinkles and tried to cover some of the material over the ugly once white, now green gauze showing through the hole. And though he tried to flatten his crooked, sensitive antenna as much as it made him wince, it always sprung back up again, as bent as before. Though he tried to make himself look presentable, he still looked a mess. Oh well, what did he have to lose? Computer, he said soberly, please contact the tallest and uplink their feed onto the main view screen.